actually what's good for the entire state when we put together the Basin Implementation Plan for the South Platte Basin. We had a number of committees that worked tirelessly, did a lot of the detailed heavy lifting on putting together the Basin Implementation Plans with the consultants, but the roundtables as a whole were very involved in going forward. We also had a lot of public meetings, public input to make sure that our Basin Implementation Plan reflected the South Platte Basin, the metro area, and what was important for going forward. And so that we don't spend any more time on this, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt. And who's on this side, to walk you through our Basin Implementation Plan. Once again, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Matt Cook with HDR. A couple quick acknowledgments before I get going. Just like to acknowledge CWCB staff that was so instrumental in developing the South Platte Basin Plan. Jacob Ornstein, Craig Gaboo, and Brent Newman, I think, are here as well. So thank you to them. Thank you to both the Basin Roundtables as well and the steering committee. So without any other delay, we'll get moving. I know introductory remarks are done. I'll provide some highlights on some of the action items that took place really since phase one, which was the draft basin plan, and then development of during what we called phase two, or the final plan. Really focused on public outreach activities. A robust program was put together and a lot of key focus on public outreach during phase two. We had several roving BRT meetings, some webinars. We developed a detailed animated video that was pretty well received across the basin and has been used, I think, by a lot of the water providers, that provided an overview of the development of the Basin Implementation Plan and some of the challenges. We had opportunities for public input off the southplattebasin.com website, which is really the South Platte Basin Implementation Plan's website. And then other BRT members made presentations to their own organizations. Another key focus was additional technical analyses, namely on water availability, surface water availability in the South Platte Basin. I'll touch on that a little bit. Developing conceptual projects and methods. And then Laurel with West Sage will describe some of the information or the efforts related to stream mile, representation, and environmental and recreational attributes. We did meet the deadline on April 17th. And so, you know, if the number of pages is any measure of success, I think we were quite successful. So Director Eklund, we might be getting pretty close to the CWP here when we're all said and done. So yeah, we unfortunately slaughtered quite a few trees to get to the final plan. So we're going to highlight briefly in each of the main sections of the basin plan some of the key changes and modifications, refinements that we made during this phase two to complete the final plan for the South Platte. I'd like to touch on just briefly in section one. We have the basin's goals and measurable outcomes, but we identified 4 overarching themes that I just want to revisit. A good Colorado plan needs a good South Platte plan. Solutions must be pragmatic, balanced, consistent with Colorado law and property rights. And the South Platte Basin will continue its leadership role in conservation and the efficient use of and management of water. And the fourth one is a balanced program is needed to continue investigating, preserving, and developing Colorado River Basin options. Section 2, just to highlight some of the information. This was based on SWASI 2010, kind of a medium water demand scenario, but the gap was identified by 2050 for M&I needs as 428,000 acre feet per year. Again, assuming a medium growth scenario. Okay, I don't know why that one was in there. And it looks like the slide that just showed HDR logo, there was an ag graphic that showed equally for ag needs from SWASI 2010, both in the South Platte. I believe the ag gap calculated around 260,000 acre feet. In the South Platte Basin, Republican River Basin was around 160,000 acre feet. Now that's just based on the process and the calculations that were done in SWASI. Actual shortage is much larger than that based on our ag dry-up that's already occurred. So I'll turn this over briefly to Laurel, and she'll touch on some of the future needs on environmental and rec.
Hi, I'm Laurel Stadjahar with West Sage Water Consultants, and I'm happy to be presenting to you all today. I just wanted to quickly touch on the environmental and recreational portion of the Basin Implementation Plan. In the South Platte Plan, it highlights the importance of the environmental and recreational values throughout the basin. It is the gateway to tourism throughout the state. It has, as Joe mentioned, the most visited state parks, as well as part of Rocky Mountain National Park. And environmental and recreational opportunities are very important to the quality of life within the basin. There are various attributes of importance throughout the basin, and those include state endangered, threatened, and species of concern, important riparian habitat, migratory bird viewing and hunting, fishing, including many gold medal fisheries, as well as various recreational opportunities, including skiing, whitewater, and flatwater boating. These attributes were taken together to produce the focus areas throughout the basin, and most of this work was done with SWASI 2010. However, the Basin Roundtables and the Environmental and Recreational Subcommittee added additional focus areas in the work for the Basin Implementation Plan. Those were added in 2011 up in the mountain area, transitional mountain areas in the northern area, up in this area, and also additional mountain areas in South Park. The assessment of the environmental and recreational gap will be discussed further when we get to the projects and methods section.
Thank you, Laurel. This is Matt Cook with HDR again. Another refinement here in the phase 2 or the final plan, we took the opportunity to incorporate some of the information out of CWCB's Climate Change in Colorado report into our plan. I know that's part of and been folded into Colorado's water plan as well. Section 3 really focused on South Platte water availability, and one of the key technical analyses that I mentioned earlier was trying to get our hands around what unappropriated water might be left within the South Platte Basin. The South Platte Decision Support System is a tool that is still in development by CWCB and the State Engineer's Office. Unfortunately, it's still in development and wasn't going to be a tool that we could utilize in the basin implementation planning process during this version 1.0, if you want to call it that. So both South Platte and Metro roundtables put a focus on trying to identify the unappropriated water. So the process that we followed on this was first to hold a workshop with some key stakeholders, included CWCB staff, State Engineer Office staff, other consultants that had knowledge of and hydrologic modeling within the basin, including Brown and Caldwell, Wilson Water Group, and others, Northern Water, other municipalities. And we got together and brainstormed what tools are available that we could leverage during the short time frame before April 17th. So 2 tools were identified, a point flow model that was developed by Brown and Caldwell with some assistance with Ken Fritzler. And that was defined basically along the main stem from Henderson on down to the state line. Another daily call chronology tool was developed by Wilson Water Group, and really its focus at the time was on the Clear Creek Basin. So using these 2 tools, we were able to look at 5 different tributary basins, including Bear Creek, Clear Creek, Boulder, Big Thompson, and the St. Vrain. And then we had 7 locations along the main stem. The uppermost was the South Platte at South Platte, which is just downstream of the confluence with the North Fork, and then all the way down to Julesburg and several points in between. So the tools, the period of record was only water year 2000 to 2013. In fact, we extended it 3 years to get to 2013. So it covers some dry and some wet years. Obviously, it didn't. The period of record stopped right before the 2013 September flood. Because a lot of the gauge records were gone or they didn't exist. So obviously we have another wet couple of years, the last 2 years. So, it's a snapshot to try to help guide some decisions versus a full-blown basin scale decision support system. But the information that we're able to get from this, the 2 models provided some base estimates. We refined those kind of in a process of talking to key water providers in the basin to get their input on conditional water rights, other IPPs, and things that may impact those base flows in the future. We also had the opportunity to meet with Division 1 engineer David Nettles and all his water commissioners. And I say all, they were either present or able to meet with them and get input on the operation of every single location in all the districts on water administration factors that would play into that water availability. So what is this chart really trying to show? Well, again, given the short period of record, we couldn't get details on exactly how many acre feet might be available, but we used more of a kind of a statistical approach. Water availability, a percent exceedance kind of plot. So what this is showing is the number of days during that period of record when there was water available. Basically, there was free river or some water available. So you can see in most of the tributaries that really what these graphs are showing is that even in this period of record, in wet years included, there's very little undeveloped water on all the tributaries. There starts to be some water available as you move downstream on the South Platte, but there's challenges with trying to develop that water, storage, water quality concerns, and other things that are will be discussed a little bit when I get into conceptual projects and methods. Just to touch on an issue or an area in Section 4 that we updated. In the draft South Platte Basin Plan, we assumed an IPP success rate of 60% across the board, both for South Platte and Metro. Based on the Basin Roundtable portfolio and trade-off analysis that was completed by CWCB, I think it was May of 2012, there was actually goals of 88% success rate for Metro and then 65% within the South Platte. So we adopted those in the final plan. As a result of that, obviously the IPP yield was slightly greater, and then that reduces the gap projection as well. So next, I'd like another part of kind of the meat and potatoes in the final plan was the development of conceptual projects. And so, you know, the BRTs have certainly committed to developing multi-purpose projects, and that was touched on earlier, having projects that meet many different needs that take full advantage first and foremost of the limited remaining in-basin supplies. And so the first two that I'll talk about are focused on that. And again, these are very high-level conceptual projects that, in part of the recommendations I'll get to at the end, they're going to need a lot of additional work. And then the next one you see there is trying to develop a conceptual project around new Colorado River Basin supplies. So this first in-basin project is really, again, expanding the use of in-basin supplies. And so this project, the sources of supply for this would be, again, unappropriated in-basin water, reusable supplies, or alternative transfer methods from ag. And this was a regional in-basin concept that was originally introduced by the Nature Conservancy, actually, through some collaboration with American Company. And this would extend conceptually kind of a prairie waters type project downstream to the middle and the lower parts in the South Platte Basin. Obviously, there's additional infrastructure and to capture, treat, and deliver the water to meet the M&I demand along the Front Range. So just to touch on some of the opportunities and challenges with this type of conceptual project, it helps develop the native unappropriated supplies, perhaps facilitate the implementation of ATMs, and allow those water providers to fully reuse their fully consumable supplies. Some of the challenges are obviously the variations in the South Platte hydrology. Those unappropriated waters only come in the very wet years. And like we see today here at the South Platte, even with this great plentiful water, much like September 2013, it may not be of the quality, and it's almost too much quantity to have a diversion structure that you could economically build to even divert it into a bucket. So there's some challenges there. There's, as a regional concept, some institutional and governance type things that have to be figured out. How would a regional entity actually work to facilitate this type of project? The next one to touch on is really focused kind of in this area, and it's focused on ag. It's groundwater recharge and augmentation for South Platte agriculture. You know, Joe touched on some of the key roles, as did Director Smith, on the importance of ag within the state. You know, this original concept was provided by Alan Berryman at Northern Water, and this concept could involve storage and groundwater recharge to make it available for augmentation purposes. So the concept here would be to use unappropriated water again in the middle and lower reaches of the South Platte Basin where it looks like water's available, and diverting it and storing it in off-channel reservoirs, and or storing it in the northern portion of the Kiowa-Bijou designated groundwater basin. In coordination with the Northeast Colorado Water Cooperative, the storage in off-channel reservoirs such as Empire Reservoir, not far from here, could provide a mechanism for the water cooperative to store this unappropriated water that would otherwise flow out of the state. You know, the Kiowa-Bijou designated groundwater basin is a non-tributary groundwater source that could provide groundwater storage and a high rate of return. Additional storage, off-channel reservoir storage, could be achieved by increasing capacity of local reservoirs such as McCarthy Reservoir, or building new other off-channel reservoirs in the area. The stored water would conceptually be delivered for use through pump back either directly to the South Platte River or to other local ditches and canals. So I'd like to note that in developing this concept, Alan Berryman did run this by the Bijou Irrigation District Board in March to get some buy-in and approval before we even included it in the basin plan. So for those here that may be hearing it for the first time or listening in, we certainly didn't want to surprise any members in that middle reach or members of the Bijou that, hey, we're championing something without their consent or awareness. So I wanted to make that note. So quickly, some of the opportunities and challenges I think I've already hit on. This really addresses certain ag water shortages and gaps in the South Platte Basin. There's some significant potential benefits to the well users in districts 2, 1, and 64. There's also some environmental and recreational benefits, as there was with the previous project, trying to make sure there's multi-purpose benefits. Challenges, financial, water rights, legal constraints. South Platte River hydrology, again, plays into this. And certainly the Platte River Recovery Program is something that needs to be taken into account in this kind of concept. So the final one here is really around a conceptual project around Colorado River Basin supplies. It's part of the overarching themes within the South Platte Plan. And the South Platte Metro BRTs, are full CC process and conceptual framework. There's strong consensus among both roundtables that all 4 legs of the stool, including storage, need to be simultaneously considered as the development of Colorado's water plan continues. And so with that, this section 4 in the basin plan includes descriptions of the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, the Eagle River MOU. It also pulled in information from SWASI 2010 that looked at large-scale projects that were already provided. I think it's Appendix N in SWASI 2010, some of like Blue River concept, Green Mountain Reservoir concept, Flaming Gorge, and others. South Metro Water Supply Authority, prior to even us completing the draft basin plan, submitted to CWCB a straw man concept that would involve using a Flaming Gorge type of interbasin supply conjunctively with groundwater within the Denver Basin Aquifer System. Now, this entire straw man in its entirety is included in Appendix F of the final plan for the South Platte. And, the final plan also, what we did based on the guidance with the roundtables was to try to take that straw man and see how it maps against the 7 points in the conceptual framework. So there's a section in section 4.8 of the final plan that tries to do just that, takes those concepts and looks at each of them and how it maps. And it maps fairly well. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. So again, some of the opportunities and challenges with this. The Front Range municipalities would have an increment of high quality reusable water. It would help minimize the loss of ag bind dry, so it helps address that concern. This type of water, as opposed to some of those in-basin, lower basin that would require probably advanced water treatment, reverse osmosis, or other type things, this opportunity or this concept would probably not require that. Some of the challenges, we got endangered fish species, endangered recovery programs on both sides of the mountain. It's going to likely require enlargement or construction of storage, again, as a component, both in South Platte, maybe even Arkansas basins, and then certainly complexities of water right administration in the event of a compact call. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laurel. She's going to run through quickly some of the environmental and rec projects.
And I'm going to do this very quickly, so you can ask questions at the end. Sorry, this is Laurel Stadjahar with West Sage Water, for the record. We produced a stream mile representation framework to better assess what the environmental and recreational needs are and what projects would be beneficial to them. And at this point, it's really a framework, and there's additional work that needs to be done. It's a very simple, easily accessible framework in Excel, so anyone can go in and look at what's on a segment of the river. It's a spreadsheet in Excel that's available on southplattebasin.com if you want to look at it in specifics. In general, it has the stream name, stream mile information, focus area information, including why those focus areas are included in the plan. It includes whether or not those environmental and recreational attributes exist in that stream segment. It includes in-stream flow information, projects information where it's available spatially, stream flow gauges, as well as major diversions. We looked at several example areas to determine what really how the stream mile representation works. We looked at areas with stream gauges in focus areas, and we looked at various hydrological analyses in these areas, partially because of the location specificity of what's needed for environmental and recreational needs, and what's needed by the specific attributes in the area. The biologists on our team looked at what studies are available in those locations. For the seasonality of flows, we looked at the actual stream flows in those areas, and I'm going to quickly run through some of this on these example areas. Each of these example areas has a general discussion in the plan to talk about what the analyses were and what's needed in those areas. And we used 4 example areas. The first being St. Vrain at Lyons in a transitional area. We also looked at South Platte above 11 Mile in a mountain area. The South Platte below Chatfield in the Metro Corridor. And the South Platte at Balzac in the lower river. Just very quickly, we looked at recreational flows, which are indicated by the red line, flushing environmental flows by the yellow line, and a environmental and recreational range, which would be indicated by the green and blue lines. And we looked at these for a couple of specific years. This is an example of a low flow year. And this is an example of a higher flow year. We also looked at the stream gauge record for the period of record and compared it to those specific flows as well for each of those example areas that I discussed. We looked at the minimum environmental flows, and when those flows are met, this graph shows where the environmental flows actually varied by month. This shows when the flushing environmental flows are available. You can see in most years they are. There's a couple years where they're not, but that might be adequate for the species. Additional work would be needed to determine exactly what is needed in some of these areas. And then we did the same for the suggested recreational flows. The stream mile representational framework is a very good framework for future analysis of the environmental needs and projects. It touches on one of the additional goals and measurable outcomes that was added into the plan since the last version of the plan. And that goal was to develop tools and methodologies to adequately assess what is needed to maintain or improve aquatic, riparian, and wetland habitats or recreational opportunities throughout the basin. There are different types of projects that are discussed in these analyses. Those include cooperational projects such as recharge, storage, diversion modification or reoperation, and channel restoration. There's still additional work that is needed to fully assess the environmental recreational needs throughout the basin. A lot of the analyses really highlighted a lack of data in those locations that we looked at, as well as additional studies that are needed. The Environmental and Recreational Subcommittee would like to continue the work in this arena and scale the stream mile representation framework to be looked at throughout the basin, identify areas that have those environmental and recreational needs, whether that be based on a specific attribute or a specific location of importance, as well as look at location-specific studies that are needed to fully address what those environmental and recreational needs are, and also determine ways to cooperatively enhance those environmental and recreational attributes.
All right. Well, I know we're pressed on time, so I'm going to do my best to go at warp speed now to get us through the rest of this. So one thing we did want to highlight here within Section 5, there's a couple different things. But first, as mentioned in the overarching themes, the focus on maintaining the South Platte Basin's leadership in water conservation. Since 2000, so from 2000 to 2010, and this is SWASI 2010 information, water providers throughout the basin were able to reduce, at least the South Platte, reduced gallon per capita per day by over 15%, and the Metro Basin over 19%. All of that passive and active conservation was applied to meet M&I gap, and that's about 235,000 acre feet. The projections within the final plan by 2050 would include an additional 22% reduction within the South Platte Basin and 17% across the Metro Basin. So all of that added up, 100% of all the passive savings in those numbers would be applied to the gap, a little north of 100,000 acre feet. 50%, as this number shows here, of the active M&I conservation will be applied to the gap, and that's consistent with the recommendations of CWCB staff, and I think it's consistent with what's in the draft Colorado Water Plan. Quickly, there's 3 portfolios illustrated and described in the South Platte Plan. Portfolio A is really a bookends kind of approach where everything is met through ag buy and dry. It's not a realistic option, but it was there to show kind of the range. Portfolio B is meeting the future demand all within basin supply. So it's a mix of IPPs, ATMs, new multi-purpose projects, some of those conceptual projects and methods that I talked about. But there's still a large component of traditional ag buy and dry, even with some active conservation. This portfolio C is a mix of the in-basin with some new Colorado River Basin supply. And so I thought I'd just highlight, this is the extreme case of a 5-degree temperature swing under a climate change scenario. So it has a huge impact, goes from 428,000, as I showed in a previous slide, to over 600. That's the impact of a 5-degree. It impacts both water supply as well as water demand. So it's very impactful on the overall gap. To go through the plan in section 5 lays out 11 plan elements, 7 of which are really in water supply and management, maximizing the implementation of IPPs, maintaining leadership in conservation and reuse, maximizing the use of existing South Platte supplies, surface and groundwater, minimizing ag buy and dry, protecting and enhancing environmental and recreational attributes, continuing to investigate, preserve, and develop Colorado River Basin options, and promoting those multi-purpose storage projects. The remaining 4 are really focused on risk management, process improvement, and new research. So climate change is mentioned in here. Again, more communication and public outreach, new technologies, and then trying to improve the federal and state permitting processes. So the recommendations that I'd like to highlight here, just touch on some. There's 15 overall that are in section 6 of our plan. Continue with SPDSS. I mentioned that. What the work that we did so far is just kind of an interim step, knowing that the SPDSS tool will be available soon. Following up on groundwater study recommendations out of House Bill 1278 is important. Continuing the analysis of ATMs. It was mentioned earlier about coordination between water utilities and land use planners. That was definitely a key focus within the South Platte Basin Plan, an important topic. Further disaggregating the M&I gap. Right now it's at the county level, but hopefully through SWASI 2016, we'll be able to disaggregate that at even a more granular level and know where those demands really are and the projects that would help serve those demands. Environmental and recreational attributes and projects. Further developing both in-basin and Colorado River Basin type projects or conceptual projects. As mentioned through here, there's still looking at other storage, efficiency of permitting process, considering potentially state-sponsored water projects, or even these other one you mentioned here, alternatives, which is more of that regional concept, as I mentioned initially. And then continuing public outreach activities. And so with that, I think I'll go ahead and close. There's some other slides, but one thing I did want to pass out, and this is something on that we're working on still as part of the public outreach process. So Laura will pass that around. This is a draft. We just presented this in draft at both the South Platte and Metro roundtables last week. It's about a 4-page, or essentially 11 by 17, folded in half. That's meant to be kind of a standalone quick summary of the basin implementation plan. Its content, some of the challenges, those 11 key elements are in there, as well as these recommendations. So I think we only had 15 copies, so hopefully it'll make its way around. If not, please share that amongst the board members. And talking with Chairman Hoppy at the dinner last night, she thought it'd be helpful to at least pass this around. I think it's going to be this and others that we'll develop in collaboration with the BRTs to assist not only the BRTs, but work collaboratively with Kate McIntyre and CWCB staff, PEPO, and so forth, and outreach. So with that, we'll go ahead and conclude and take any questions that you have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Does the board have any questions for Matt or for Laurel?
Or for Joe or for Mark?
For Joe or for Mark?
Or Jacob, or yeah.
You know, you're the hired gun, so you got to.
Yeah, that's true.
So I do want to again thank Joe and Jimmy on for the tour that got canceled and the great presentation that replaced that last night, and for your hospitality and really for all the members of the South Platte Roundtable and the Metro Roundtable that have participated. Really, this was a grassroots effort, and from my perspective, it really made our basin come together. And we're so broad and so diverse, but in analyzing everything that we have and do in our basin, really brought it together in this implementation plan. So I thank all of you for your work and for being here for today for your presentations. Director Eklund, do you have any questions? You look like you might.
I always have a question. This is just very well done. And I just want to add my kudos and my thanks for the hard work and the effort. This is, I think we often refer to it as the hardest working river in the state. And it's difficult to, match the level of insight that this provides. So I'm hoping that we can work with the consultants that have been employed by each of the separate basins, just like we did at the front end, where we got you all in the same room and get you in to do kind of a lessons learned or best management practices kind of session after we're done.
Forward to it.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes. Jacob, you're up again.
I'm up again very briefly, just introducing Heather Dutton to present the Rio Grande Basin Implementation Plan.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, as Jacob mentioned, I'm Heather Dutton. I'm with the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project in the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District. I also represent recreation on our roundtable, and I got that position because I lobbied that I am a fun haver. So who better to represent rec? I also brought with me Mike Gibson, who's the chair of our roundtable, and Emma Regier, who is always the youngest person in the room, so she has to run the computers, but she's our programs manager with the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. And then back here, we've got Nathan Coombs with the Caneos Conservancy District. So that's our crew today. We're really excited to be here, and I passed around some of our executive summaries of our plan. As you guys know, Director Smith loves pictures, so he lobbied pretty hard for this to be a beautiful document. So I hope you will enjoy it and cherish it and share it with your friends. And if you would like to share it, we can definitely hook you up with more copies. And so we'll get going. We're here today to share with you about our basin and the constraints that we identified during the planning process and the actions that we plan to take to address those constraints. The Rio Grande Basin is defined by extremes. Ringed by the Continental Divide and 14,000-foot peaks, the San Luis Valley is the largest intermountain valley in the world. The highest average annual snowfall in Colorado, an average of 430 inches, is on Wolf Creek Pass, while the lowest precipitation of 7 inches is in Center, Colorado. The oldest water right in Colorado is the Acequia, the San Luis People's Ditch, and the oldest town, San Luis. The largest canal in Colorado is the Rio Grande Canal, which feeds the basin's farms. Agriculture is the largest economic driver in the valley, which is one of the most intensely irrigated agriculture regions in the world. Farmers grow potatoes, barley, primarily for Coors, alfalfa and grass hay, canola, quinoa, and other specialty crops. Ranchers raise cattle, sheep, chickens, and other livestock. Recreation is another significant economic contributor and is supported by the surrounding Rio Grande National Forest, BLM lands, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service refuges, CPW state wildlife areas, and the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. These public lands also support outstanding ecosystems and terrestrial and aquatic wildlife species. The basin supports over 170 species of birds, significant fisheries, and abundant upland habitats. And about 46,400 hardy souls live in the 7,500 square mile basin and inhabit small but unique towns. Half of the valley residents live in the country outside of the towns. The Rio Grande Basin is experiencing many of the same challenges that are occurring in other areas of the state, although some are unique to our area. Long-term drought has plagued the basin, leading to higher temperatures and below average stream flows for 12 of the last 14 years. The basin is challenged by adapting to climate change, and the Bureau of Reclamation estimates a reduction in stream flows by 30% by the end of this century in the upper Rio Grande. Many ecosystems are in flux, with over 500,000 acres of spruce forest killed by spruce bark beetles. And degraded and at-risk habitats are present, and some aquatic dependent species are being considered for listing as threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act. And as you guys have heard, the West Fork Complex Fire burned 88,000 acres in the upper Rio Grande in 2013. There is concern about future landscape scale fires impacting other areas of the basin in the future. Dust on snow events have become more frequent and severe, and snowmelt runoff has occurred earlier and faster than it used to historically. Many of these factors have led to greater reliance on the two aquifers that sustain the valley's agriculture, town, and many critical ecosystems. Additionally, irrigation and municipal entities have aging water infrastructure, which is impacted by costly and time-consuming permit processes. And finally, the administration of the Rio Grande Compact is strained by environmental factors and the unreliable stream flow forecasting that we are experiencing. Obligations to downstream states result in a permanent call on the Rio Grande and curtailment of Colorado's consumptive use. So while these challenges are formidable, the basin has a history of working together to implement projects that meet multiple needs. CWCB, thanks guys, has been a critical partner in these projects, and we've received over $12 million from the WSRA account. Those monies have been leveraged by 4 times. We've quadrupled this investment with significant input from CWCB loans and from in-kind cash. Here's some examples of the work. This is one of our favorite projects right now. The Conejos Water Conservancy District has partnered with CWCB, NASA, NOAA, and others to improve forecasting and snowpack measurements. The goal is to improve the quantification of annual snowpack in order to better predict annual flows and reduce the need to curtail senior water users. REACT has also worked to improve forecasting and flood prediction by deploying a mobile radar during the summer monsoon season to better predict or protect people during events downstream of the burn scar. Other exciting projects are cooperative projects with reservoirs. The Rio Grande Cooperative Project is a partnership between the San Luis Valley Irrigation Company and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And it's a project to rehab 2 pre-compact reservoirs in order to improve their storage and operating abilities. In addition to repairing the reservoirs, the partners are working to develop a pretty amazing agreement that will improve the practices in a way that benefits agriculture, environment, recreation, and municipal users. The Terrace Reservoir Project is another partnership that's pretty outstanding. It was a project between the Terrace Irrigation Company and the Alamosa River Keepers. Together, they repaired the spillway for the reservoir that had a storage restriction on it. And by repairing the spillway, the storage restriction was lifted, which allowed the reservoir to store water for a downstream, in-stream flow right held by the river keepers. The project then helped irrigators, recreators, and fisheries below the reservoir, and the river keepers are so excited to share that there are now fish in the river, which was once dead. Agriculture infrastructure projects also have the potential to meet multiple needs. The Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project, McDonald Ditch Company, and NRCS are working to replace the aging and poorly functioning McDonald Ditch Diversion Dam and Headgate. That was it. It doesn't reliably supply water to irrigators. It's a barrier to fish. It's impassable by boats, and it causes flooding in the surrounding areas. So the new dam, which we missed, whoopsies, includes automated headgates, fish and boat passage, and is in a stable spot in the river with a functioning floodplain. Basin entities have also made huge investments in environmental and recreation projects. The Willow Creek Reclamation Committee is a grassroots organization in Creede, and they have worked to clean up a legacy of mining in their area. The work of the committee has kept Creede from being designated as a Superfund site, and has resulted in great improvements in water quality. Their most recent project, the floodplain project, restored the channel sinuosity and riparian vegetation. And by routing the stream away from mine tailings, the water quality hasn't been improved, and it's another spot where there are, again, fish and macroinvertebrates in an area that there used to be none. The Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust has also worked to protect the Rio Grande and Caneos River corridor. They recently reached a goal of protecting 25,000 acres of working ranches in conservation easements. And by doing so, important landscapes are protected from future development, which protects wildlife corridors and the rural way of life in our area. RIGHT also works to tie water rights to the properties, which keeps the water from being moved to other uses. And other entities have conserved significant parcels. The San Luis Valley has 300,000 acres of land in permanent conservation. Our basin plan identified the critical need to continue projects like these that address existing and future challenges. And some of those methods are following. Aquifer management will be a huge effort through groundwater management subdistricts. The Rio Grande Water Conservation District has put together Subdistrict 1, which has taken 20,000 acres out of production in an effort to try to reach aquifer sustainability. The subdistricts are also a key component of the pending state engineer's well rules and regulations. And as the rules will require users to replace their depletion. So they'll have to either join a subdistrict, have an individual plan of augmentation, or shut down their well. So by providing a group plan of water management, the subdistricts allow water users to adhere to the rules while continuing to support the substantial agriculture community. Reservoir and infrastructure projects are also identified as methods to improve water management and meet multiple needs. By bringing reservoirs into full capacity, we are working to craft operating protocols that allow for improvements in the timing of environmental and recreation flows, agriculture deliveries, and flexibility in meeting the Rio Grande compact deliveries. Water administration will also be improved by enhanced stream flow forecasting. The projects that are underway are the first step to improve forecasts. Basin organizations are working to establish more permanent measuring sites and a permanent Doppler radar with a permanent Travis Smith in front of it. These measures will help the Division of Water Resources more accurately administer the compact and reduce curtailment on local water users during the irrigation season. Watershed health is a top priority in the basin, as the uplands provide critical water supply, ecosystem services, and very important habitats, in addition to abundant recreation. As identified projects is the Upper Rio Grande Assessment, which will characterize the condition of riparian areas and influencing uplands, and develop a systematic approach to landscape scale water protection and ecological restoration. Basin parties are also at the table with the Rio Grande National Forest and the revision of the Rio Grande National Forest Plan, and this will allow the basin's voice to be heard as part of the future management of the watershed. Riparian and wetland projects will be a key to protecting and improving water resources, and they also enhance aquatic and terrestrial habitat and improve water quality along the way. Additionally, the plan identified the need to improve recreation opportunities throughout the basin, and a specific example of a project where we want to do this is an analysis of boatable days and necessary flows to both the Rio Grande and Caneos rivers. Additionally, protecting existing important ecosystems and working lands through conservation easements will continue to be a priority, and it's another way that we can protect those valuable landscapes and water resources. Conservation easements are also critical to assisting in protecting the southwest willow flycatcher and the yellow-billed cuckoo through their regional habitat conservation plan. And then finally, municipal system upgrades will be necessary to address issues with aging infrastructure and the need to maintain compliance with water quality standards. Changes to agriculture practices will also be explored. There are many farmers working to improve their water management by improving soil health and by also looking at alternative cropping methods. Examples include using green manure as a rotational crop, using companion crops with their potatoes, and utilizing livestock to graze stubble and then incorporate organic matter. Other farmers are changing their operations by growing crops that they haven't done before. And then education will continue to be the cornerstone of the Rio Grande Roundtable's efforts. Through investment in the Rio Grande Watershed Conservation and Education Initiative, or Judy Lopez, as most people know that organization, we have seen an increase in the community understanding of water issues and local ecosystems. And the need continues for education opportunities through tours, workshops, school curriculum, field trips, and press for people young and old. Many additional projects and methods have been developed to help address the constraints and challenges that we've identified, and these projects are described in greater detail in that beautiful executive summary and in the full Rio Grande Basin Plan. The Rio Grande Basin Roundtable recognizes that many of the identified projects will require robust partnerships with other basin entities, state and federal agencies, and our continued partnership with the CWCB. That will help us secure funding and bring in the needed technical expertise. With continued investment from the state and partners, we will continue to improve the future sustainability of agriculture, environmental, recreational, municipal, and industrial water uses in the San Luis Valley. Thank you so much for the time and the opportunity to present to you guys. We really, really appreciate it, and we will accept questions.
Thank you very much. That was a beautiful presentation. I enjoyed the slideshows, and I assume that Director Smith has some comments to make.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Heather, thank you, Emma, for the great presentation. We hope you enjoy the executive summary. We also had a 400-page basin plan. It's hard to carry around with one hand. So we hope that the executive summary, could you turn this down just a little bit, will be something that really helps tell our story. You know, it's been a great volunteer effort. Is it loud enough now? But, okay, finding that balance. I'll get a little bit closer. The volunteer effort that was mentioned for the South Platte, you know, it has been a big lift. I think we've all recognized that, spoke to it earlier about this public effort, outreach, and education has come to the forefront. We thought it was just about graphs and charts and for the Rio Grande not having enough water and how do you deal with continued drought and declining aquifer, but it's really been an effort, as Heather has described, to paint a picture, bring more people to the conversation. And now once hopefully the basin plan and the water plan, Colorado's water plan, start implementing these things. And so the conversation has been spread beyond the same 10 people in the San Luis Valley. It's been a great effort. And Heather, my hat goes off to you for your leadership and many, many roles that Heather takes on in her young career. And Madam Chairman, if I may, I want to recognize Mike Gibson, our roundtable chair, who has faithfully served.
Mike, would you stand up?
Mike, please. Faithfully served in leading our diverse group in the San Luis Valley, and it's not just irrigators or agency people, but I think it's been a great effort to just include. You invite people to the process, and I think that's what we're seeing through the roundtable. The fruit of the roundtable is expanding our conversation and educating each other. So Mike, thank you for your leadership. Mike will soon be retiring at the end of the year. And so Mike, I thank you for your leadership as roundtable chair. And again, Madam Chairman, it's I want to recognize the hard work of the San Luis Valley. There's only a few of us, you know, that to do the work. And so
Yes, I
with
do
that,
realize that.
thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Any other comments from the board? Yes, Mike?
I'd like to echo what Travis has said, although no one can put it quite as eloquently. But I really wanted to thank you for the slideshow. It brought me home. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Director Eklund?
Thanks, Heather, for that presentation. Excellent job. we had a presentation at our last meeting from the Rocky Brothers and their operation down in the valley, and some of the innovation that's going on in agriculture and kind of rotation of crops. And I think one of the advantages of having this regionally based water planning process is that allows us to really become a clearinghouse for good ideas. And we've got Director Brown from the Department of Ag on our board, and I think it can facilitate those good ideas crossing the state with more efficiency. So thanks again.
And if you guys don't mind, since I'm still standing here, I just wanted to thank you again for everything that you guys have done to help our basin. CWCB has been a huge partner, and not just the board in approving our grants and loans and coming on tours, but the staff is outstanding. And I don't know where you find them, but you get the most energetic and friendly and helpful people. And I always appreciate working with the staff. And I kind of wanted to call a couple of them out by name, but I don't think that's fair because every person I've ever met from CWCB has been great. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Jacob.
Do you, Director
have the
Hoppy,
floor.
would you like to go on to C before lunch?
Yes, I
Okay.
would like to hear from Frank.
All right. So introducing the Gunnison Basin Implementation Plan, we have Frank Kugel here, and I know that Greg Johnson from Wilson Water is here as well.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and directors of the board. My name is Frank Kugel. I'm the general manager of the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District and chairman of the Basin Implementation Plan for the Gunnison Basin Roundtable. First, to address Director Hoppy's burning question, yes, rumor did win last night, so I just wanted to report that. But on to more important things. We're here today to give an update on the Gunnison Basin Roundtable's Basin Implementation Plan. I know we're pressed for time, so I'll try to go quickly through our 418 pages of document. Seriously, I just wanted to let's see. Give a summary of updates. We're not going to go into our plan in detail, but just highlight some of the changes that have happened since our July report to you in Rangeley last year. So what we did with this revision and in finalizing our report, we wanted to address just the changes, build on the highlights, and make the document flexible. There's been a number of changes that have come to our attention based upon our broad outreach efforts in our basin. We've had Hannah Holm with Colorado Mesa University doing a great deal of effort for the roundtable. She and George Sibley, with our PEPO chairman, have done a great job in reaching out to people. And so we've got a lot of input from them and are trying to be able to adapt to all that input as we move forward. We are focusing on projects in this latest revision. We want to make sure that we're accommodating multi-purpose projects as much as possible, looking at both consumptive and non-consumptive benefits. So that's a key part of our refinement of our BIP. We wanted to better tie into the framework of the Colorado Water Plan. And so we did a closer adaptation to the guidelines that the staff had put together. I think we've done a better product in integrating with the Colorado Water Plan with our BIP. And then the other effort was on minor updates, clarifications, and so forth. So in doing the revisions to our BIP, the main thing was that we wanted to have a strong grassroots approach from the Gunnison Basin Implementation Planning Committee. And I wanted to take this moment to also thank the directors of the CWCB for maintaining that grassroots approach to water planning in the effort. It's really important to people in our basin to know that they have a hand in this, and I really appreciate the approach that the CWCB has taken in supporting that effort. So we also had technical outreach, drilling down into each of these projects and trying to get a good idea of benefits and solutions to these different projects and how to move forward with meeting the gaps. We had a great deal of outreach and produced films, and as mentioned, radio spots, a number of outreach meetings across the basin. It's been a great plan, and Director Eklund and your staff have done a great job in setting the framework for how to reach out to the public, and we appreciate all the work that you did in laying out the groundwork for us to follow on that. It's been very helpful. We wanted to not reinvent the wheel on our moving forward to this latest phase, but to just try and hit the highlights of the plan and refine it to address all the feedback we received. And then all these changes are documented in a matrix in our report. Just to summarize, the goals of the Gunnison Basin Plan is we wanted to, the primary goal was to maintain our existing uses, to protect those moving forward in the year 2050 and beyond. We really have a strong agricultural emphasis in our basin and wanted to protect agricultural shortages or to address those shortages and maintain the vibrant agricultural community that we have in our basin. We have a significant number of agricultural shortages that we wish to address through a number of these projects. And if we can address other basin needs at the same time, recreational, environmental, municipal, those types of needs, we see projects that will hit all of those benefits at the same time. And we have a tiered and combined project list that our tier 1 projects are primarily grouped together to address these multiple beneficiaries, and are also the tier 1 projects are listed for ones that are likely to be completed by the year 2025. So we really wanted to put the ones that were close to shovel ready as we move forward. The plan structure for our basin implementation plan, section 1 was basin goals, defining our priorities for the basin. Section 2 is to identify the basin needs and both consumptive and non-consumptive. Section 3, evaluating the options to analyze the different projects to address these needs. Section 4 is to have basin projects, to list those projects and implementation strategies. And then section 5 is the conclusions and recommendations on how to move forward. This is a list of our primary goals in the basin. And again, the number 1 goal is to protect the existing uses in the Gunnison Basin. Complementary goals that aren't in any particular priority are listed below. The top 2 address agriculture, both discouraging the conversion of productive agricultural lands to all other uses. I think that's a statewide message that we've heard loud and clear through the water planning process. Goal 3, improve the agricultural water supplies. Through this process, we've identified and quantified shortages that are experienced in the Gunnison Basin. There's roughly 18% shortfall between the needs of crops and the actual water available to satisfy those needs. So we have work to do to close the gap on those agricultural supplies. Goal 4 is to identify and address municipal and industrial water shortages. We're fortunate in the Gunnison Basin in that relative to other basins in the state, especially those on the Front Range, our municipal and industrial shortages, the gaps are manageable moving forward, and we're hopeful that many of those shortages can be addressed through conservation and demand reduction efforts in our basin. Goal 5, quantify and protect environmental and recreational water uses. There's been a great deal of effort done with that. We've worked through watershed coalition groups in the Upper Gunnison Basin, in Crested Butte and Lake City. And in the Lower Basin, there's an active effort in Uray County and Montrose County on the Uncompahgre, and we've worked closely with those groups. Also, the North Fork has an active watershed coalition in the Paonia-Hotchkiss area. Goal 6 is to maintain or improve water quality throughout the basin. We've had a number of old mining activity problems that we're dealing with, Superfund sites in the Lake Fork and in the Cold Creek area and Slate River near Crested Butte. So we're actively pursuing water quality efforts, and that's going to be a key goal moving forward. Goal 7, describe and encourage beneficial use between agricultural and environmental recreational water uses. We're looking at opportunities. We've got a couple of projects currently underway or recently completed where we're working. Trout Unlimited is one of the sponsors. The Nature Conservancy is another sponsor of projects. We're working with agricultural interests to provide a more firm water supply for irrigators, but at the same time, look for opportunities to leave water in the stream wherever it doesn't affect the ultimate consumptive use of agriculture. Number 8 is to restore, maintain, and modernize critical water infrastructure. That's identified in that projects list. We have a number of, for example, demand areas on the Grand Mesa where we have some 200 dams that are in old, dilapidated condition. Several of them are. A number of storage restrictions on the Grand Mesa that we're working to try and rehabilitate structures such as that to maximize storage. And we've heard loud and clear how storage is important to the future of water in Colorado. So that's one of our key goals there. And then finally is to maintain an active and comprehensive public education process about water resources in the Gunnison Basin. So we're going to continue that educational effort, working closely with both the Colorado Mesa University and Western State Colorado University to reach out through those academic institutions and to get their guidance in working with the public. The statewide principles section of our BIP somewhat mirrors the conceptual framework that is identified and been worked on very heavily through the efforts of Director Stolp and the IBCC. So we're generally following that in identifying risk management is one of the principles. Want to make sure that the any future water supply or new supply development accepts risks of shortage and follows the prior appropriation doctrine. And we want to do another principle as well as front range diverters. So it's important to address that that point, that a small diversion in on the west slope is something that needs to be considered as well as other diversions. The new supply development must have identified sponsors, beneficiaries, and meet certain minimum criteria. I think this is a statement that reflects that our basin is not in favor of a statewide water project, but that individual projects must be identified with individual beneficiaries. And let's see, that follows into local solutions were addressed previously. And then water conservation, demand management, and land use planning should be equitably employed statewide. Our basin is following up on this. You've heard from a number of our users in the past about, well, gall darn it, you don't need to be taking our water if you are able to conserve more and reduce your demands. But we realize and recognize that that's a statewide goal. Our basin is working hard towards conservation strategies. One of the projects identified is to work with the municipalities in the Upper Gunnison Basin, the 7 water providers in our basin, to develop a basin-wide plan for conservation efforts and to identify funding sources to improve demand reduction, leak detection, and other conservation measures. And then finally, statewide discussion, outreach, and education. We want to make sure that our children and our children's children's children are identified for moving, that they recognize the gap that is facing them, that we need to bring younger people to the table. We're reaching out to elementary school age people. We're at least in our district and other districts across our basin are bringing in interns that try and spread the word to the younger people that they need to become engaged and that they need to recognize the issues that are facing us. And with that, I will turn it over the remainder of the presentation to Greg Johnson with Wilson Water Group. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Greg Johnson, Wilson Water Group, for the record. I will spare you a whole lot of detail, but did want to go into a little bit more on exactly what we did with the plan. Again, as Frank had mentioned, we were fairly abbreviated with our approach. We just started in January of this year, went through, really focused on projects. As you can see, we updated the project list, refined, streamlined that list. Some things actually came off the list, added a number of new projects. A lot of the projects that were already on the list we realized were actually more multi-purpose than we had originally anticipated, that they actually were meeting a lot of needs as we wrote those up. So had changed that. Have an example later. I'll show you how we tied each of those goals to the projects. And then one of the substantive changes we made to the projects was on that tier 1. The tiering of the projects was our attempt to try and prioritize as much as possible without doing a strict prioritization. Originally, we had looked at 2020, those shovel-ready projects that we had thought would hopefully be, feasible by 2020. We bumped that out to 2025, knowing that in a lot of cases that's just not realistic. Examples of a few projects that are actually progressing as we speak. Frank had mentioned the water conservation planning in the Upper Gunnison. So the 7 entities up there, a regional water conservation plan, that is moving forward, similar to some other efforts across the state like the Roaring Fork and the Grand Junction area. The Upper Uncompahgre Basin is working on augmentation plans, so a regional aug plan up there. That is something that you will see before you for funding in the near future. And then Frank had mentioned a number of the reservoirs up on the Grand Mesa. That's one of the hot spots in the Gunnison area where there are some major infrastructure needs, a lot of historic infrastructure up there that is really showing its age right now. So Youngs Creek Reservoirs is another one that you will see in the near future. I believe that has passed the project screening committee with the roundtable and will be before you shortly. There's another one that you'll see this afternoon, a fairly small application for Marcotte Reservoir, another one of those small reservoirs up on the mesa that has some issues with its outlet structure. We did not have a whole lot of substantive changes to the document, as you can see, but we did have some minor changes. Frank had mentioned that we tried to tie this back to the water plan as much as possible. As you remember, the timing of these things as they were coming out, the water plan draft was not released at the time. We went back through the draft of the water plan as released in December of last year, tried to tie that back, things like scenario planning, the no and low regrets actions, to try and tie that back into the language of our plan. And then there are things like conservation strategies. This was a hot topic among a lot of the West Slope roundtables, or really statewide. The Gunnison Basin Roundtable had some more discussions about conservation. There was originally in the statewide principles that Frank had gone over, support for conservation statewide. the roundtable decided to change that from support for medium conservation to support for high conservation. And then there was a reference to groundwater issues that was absent from the plan originally, that was added to this draft as well. And again, these are just some examples. There are a number of other minor changes to the plan that we don't have time to get into today. As for clarifications, numerous minor changes, language changes. Did want to note that we really wanted to stress the importance of agriculture in the basin. This was something that we tried to come off very loudly with the first iteration of the plan. But the more that the roundtable had talked about the plan itself and where to emphasize things in this new draft, agriculture again rose to the top, of course. So I don't expect you to read that. That was a text box that we included that really tries to stress the importance of agriculture in the basin, some of the economic statistics, just to show how things are linked and how important that is. A fair amount of language refinements, things speaking to the statewide principles, climate change we had in the plan originally. Again, not in a whole lot of detail as a lot of the plans, did not have the space to really get into that. Changed the language somewhat there. In-stream flows, non-native fish, we had to clarify some of that language. We had extensive updates to the public outreach section, which was primarily in the appendix, but a whole lot of new letters and material that had come in for that. Updated some data, some of the reports that we referenced, and then minor restructuring Frank had alluded to, changing things around from section to section, education, outreach, water quality, watershed health, trying to call things out a little bit more explicitly, added a new conservation section, which incorporated some of the material that we already had in section 2. This material I'll go over fairly quickly. You've seen this before. We just wanted to show some of the examples of how we approached things with the Gunnison Basin Plan. We looked at historical hydrology. We wanted to look at 10 locations in the basin. There's over 500 nodes in the model, which is one of the things that we had really focused on for creating the plan. We wanted to pick 10 of those. Most of them are actually upstream on tributaries to really get an idea of what the water availability is for some of the projects up there, to start to connect the dots and see what's feasible, what's not, where the flows are. In addition to that, we looked at the climate change hydrology as well. The Colorado River Water Availability Study, of which you're very familiar with, has all sorts of data that can be mined for that purpose. So we took some of the data from that study at the same 10 locations, looking at what things might look like under different climate change scenarios. So this was the attempt of the Gunnison Basin to start to get into some of that scenario planning. Was not tied in a hard sense to quantify each of the 5 scenarios that the CWCB has developed, but it was an attempt to start to get at that. And hopefully that can be explored more through further efforts of the board and the Statewide Water Supply Initiative. And then finally, another case study that we had worked on was in-stream flow analyses, looking at 12 locations in the basin, most of which did not have stream gauges, so that we could actually show the benefits of having a model in that area. Again, the model, of course, is not perfect, but it helps to illustrate how those in-stream flows are being met, or in some cases not met. We picked a couple dry years for this analysis, so 77 and 2002, and at each of those locations. Each of these case studies are detailed in the appendices of the document, and we have observations written up as well for each of those locations. Frank had mentioned the simple tiered approach that we took. This was our attempt to try and prioritize again what's important in the basin without going into a hard, strict prioritization that may pit project proponents against each other. So really looking at the shovel-ready projects versus things that may have a water right, and again, are very important projects. A lot of those are major storage projects, but really aren't feasible in the near future. And then things that are farther down the list that we that the Basin Roundtable wanted to keep on the list, but it, will probably happen at a much later date. The planned project list that we had combined a number of projects, all different purposes. We called out, of course, what the purpose was for each of those and where the multi-purpose nexus was for things. We started with the SWASI list, of course. We refined things substantially. We assessed a lot of the projects for water availability, feasibility, competition issues for the same water. And then we offered to do modeling analyses for any of the projects that wanted it. We ended up doing a modeling analysis for 8 of the projects. As you can imagine, that one of the biggest difficulties with the process is a huge variability in the quantity and the quality of the project data. So we made our best effort to be as consistent as possible, but at the end of the day, some projects have a lot more detail than others. We spent a fair amount of effort in data collection. That was our targeted technical outreach. A lot of that was actually on the ground. We had meetings in each of the water districts, and then we've had a number of follow-up phone conversations and email and all sorts of correspondence. And then we had the inventory projects, which we included. One of the concepts that the Gunnison Basin focused on was, well, let's do the best we can this time around, understanding that we can't get on the ground to each of these structures, each of these areas, and really understand what's going on. So the proposal being that in each of these subbasins within the Gunnison, what ideally needs to be done on both a consumptive and environmental and recreational standpoint is to do a real proper assessment at a local level. And so that was something that we included on the list, actually, more as a placeholder for work that can be done down the road. Project list, again, I don't expect you to read this. This was just to show, we restructured the project list. Even things as simple as how you display the data, of course, can be fairly complicated. So there are some opinions, and we actually changed how we presented the project list. Project summary sheets, we did not change. We added a number of those. So there was a fair amount of work this time around with some of those new projects, updating the summary sheets, making sure, again, that we had as much consistency as possible, as much of that data as we could get. And then, again, a very quick example of some of the project-specific analyses that we did. This one was looking at end-of-month content, storage contents for the Meridian Lake Enlargement Project, just showing some of the things that we can do with the modeling capabilities that we have, and trying to show what the water availability is for a project like that. All of the projects that we have on the list, we tied back to the basin goals for the Tier 1 projects. So trying to show, very simple check marks, how does this meet each of those 9 basin goals? And this is something that we went through and overhauled this time around and really, put a microscope to each of those projects and said, okay, how does it really potentially meet some of these things? And had a lot of feedback from roundtable members on the multipurpose aspects of the projects. And then finally, the next steps, we do still have some funding available. And that project inventory concept is the one thing that's hanging out there. That was something that we had brought before you when we came back for the additional funding for this round of revisions to the plan, and said, we may not be able to do a very thorough inventory on the ground, but we can at least get things kicked off and start, meeting with the dam safety engineer, for example. The Grand Mesa reservoirs is one of the big ones that came, right to the top. And then there's a couple environmental focus areas that folks are very interested in moving forward with as well. And so that's something we may be working with some of the local watershed groups that Frank had mentioned on the ground to have more meetings, get out there, see what projects are potentially planned, and get some of that data in the books so that we've got more information to present to the board. And that's all we've got. So that's the one picture. It's hard to compete with Heather's beautiful presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments here and the updates. Director McLeod, do you have any comments? I thought they did a good job too. Any other comments from board members? Director Eklund.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the presentation, Frank and Greg. I appreciate the diligence in moving your plan toward the water plan, kind of the concepts that are embodied in there. And then I did have one exception. I guess I'd take issue with Frank's characterization that someone in the Gunnison Basin said, "Gol darn it." I don't think that's ever happened. So, that's it. That's all I got.
What do you think he said?
Where's our legal count, Pat?
I think this is a good time to take a little break for lunch. Thank you very much. We will come back after lunch and continue with the North Platte. And Greg, I guess you'll be up again then. But Director Eklund, do you have instructions?
Instructions for lunch are please let the board and staff grab their lunch, and if there's extra, then you're welcome to it. But we'll try and do that so we can get as close to back on schedule as possible here. And it's where? Just in the room behind the glass doors, I guess.
I believe there's also a restaurant in the building, restaurant and bar. They're closed today. Well, shoot. Well, anyway, we're going to take a break for lunch. Let's be back at 1:15. And thank you all for being here. It's not too far to go to town if you need a